The first time John Stanfa walked into South Philadelphia, the air smelled like hot bread, fresh asphalt, and wet newspapers. It was 1955, July. A brutal kind of heat where even the shadows sweat. He was 35, a Sicilian bricklayer by trade, not by ambition. His hands were thick, his voice low, like a man who always had something to say but never needed to speak it loud. He wore a pressed shirt, always white, always tucked. He moved like he was born slow, like nothing in this world could ever make him run. John wasn't flashy. That was for the kids chasing crumbs. He watched. That's what made him dangerous. In the old country, back in Cacamo, they used to say the quiet ones are closest to the devil. In Philly, they just said he was smart. He didn't come to the streets looking for blood, not at first. He worked hard. Kept his head down, got a job as a driver for Angelo Bruno, the old Don. That was his first taste. Sitting behind the wheel, listening to men in the backseat speak in half sentences. Men who never trusted the phone, who paused every time someone walked past the car. Men who smelled like leather, sweat, and cigars. Stanfa learned everything from that front seat. He learned what not to say, what not to look at, and when to pretend you didn't hear someone admit to something that could bury 10 people. Bruno liked him, said he was reliable, said he had that Sicilian silence, the kind you could build a kingdom on. But kingdoms come with enemies. By the 70s, the old way was cracking. Drugs were creeping in, heroin mostly. Bruno didn't like it, said it brought heat, said it turned soldiers into junkies and rats, but others wanted the money. Quick, greasy money that could build empires overnight. That's when the whispers started. John kept driving, kept nodding, but he knew. The streets were turning. In 1980, they put a shotgun in Bruno's head, blew out the back window of his car like a paper lantern. South Philly didn't sleep that night. Every alley, every barbershop, every bar went quiet. And John, he disappeared. Some said he fled. Some said he was mourning. Some said he was planning. Truth is, he was listening, the way he always did. The throne was open. But thrones don't stay empty long, especially not here. The young wolves started circling. Guys like Nicky Scarfo, hotheads with no respect, no patience. They wanted blood, fast money, and fear. They didn't care about the rules. But John was old school. He believed in omertà, in order, in loyalty. Not because it was noble, but because without it, everything turned to chaos, and he hated chaos. He spent the next 10 years building quietly, brick by brick, not with guns, not yet, with respect, with small favors, with silence. By the time Scarfo fell, brought down by his own greed and violence, Stanfa stepped back into the light, older now, but not weak, his eyes still sharp, still cold. He wasn't the kind of man who had to say, "I'm in charge." He just was. But the Philly throne. It wasn't made for peace. The streets had changed. The kids weren't scared of old men anymore. They carried Uzis, not switchblades. They wore sneakers, not leather shoes. They didn't believe in God, only in profit. John knew what was coming. He just didn't know how bloody it'd be. He lit a cigarette, sat in the back room of a bakery he now owned. The same one where he used to knead dough as a kid. Now it was a front. Outside, a kid was tagging a wall with spray paint, didn't even flinch when a car backfired. The world had changed, but John Stanfa hadn't. And if they wanted the throne, they'd have to rip it from his cold, dead hands. The summer of '91 came heavy. Heat clung to the city like guilt. Humid air choked out even the toughest men. And in South Philly, the walls sweated secrets. After Scarfo's empire collapsed under the weight of paranoia and bloodshed, the streets felt lawless, not wild like the movies. Worse, directionless, like a beast with its head cut off, still thrashing. Crews split, soldiers jumped ship, captains talked to feds. Everyone was watching their backs, but nobody was watching the front door. That's when it happens. When a city begs for someone to take control. That's when John Stanfa came back. Not with a roar, not with fireworks, just showed up. Quiet, like rain starting on a window. He didn't have to announce it. Word traveled on its own. Stanfa's back. John thought he was done. He's not done. He's just starting. By now he was in his early 70s, face a little more lined, hair gone salt and pepper, leaning more salt. But those eyes hadn't changed, still sharp, still scanning the room before sitting down, still the kind of man who didn't blink when he stared. He started holding meetings, not in fancy restaurants, not in gaudy nightclubs, in garages, basements, construction sites at night, places where the air smelled like oil, dust, and sweat, places where the new kids didn't like to go. He wasn't there to impress. He was there to remind. He told them things straight, said the old ways worked because they were simple. You respect the chair, you pay your tax, you don't bring heat, you don't move stupid. They listened. Not all of them. But the ones that mattered did. Guys who were tired of chaos, tired of cokeheads pulling triggers over spilled drinks, tired of walking into diners and wondering if the guy next to you was wired. Stanfa was offering order. That's something men crave more than power, especially men who've seen how quick it all burns down. He started making moves. First, he took back the unions, bricklayers, concrete, drywall. He didn't care if it was blue collar. That's where the real money was. Not drugs, not gambling, construction. That's how he built his web. He called in old favors. Some guys owed him from the Bruno days. Others just feared him enough to say yes. A handshake here, a warning there. Within months, he had eyes on jobs all over the city. No one poured concrete in Philly without Stanfa knowing what color their boots were. Then came Vinny, the chimp Merlino. Loud, young, ambitious, dangerous in a dumb way. The kind of guy who wanted headlines, who craved being the next Scarfo without understanding Scarfo's ending. He thought Stanfa was soft, old, slow, big mistake. Stanfa didn't react, not right away. That was his strength. He let tension build, let the disrespect stack like bricks. That way, when he moved, it didn't look like anger. It looked like justice. Vinny started mouthing off. Told people he'd take over the streets within a year. Said Stanfa should be in a nursing home. Said he wasn't with the times. John heard it all. He just kept sipping his espresso. Real quiet. Then, one afternoon, Vinny's top guy, a loudmouth named Ralph Rat Eyes Torelli, was found in the trunk of his own Cadillac. Mouth taped shut, hands gone. Just stubs. A message. Nobody claimed it, but everybody knew. That's how John talked when he wanted something said loud. Vinny got quiet after that, but not smart. See, Stanfas understood something these young guys didn't. You don't rule through fear alone. You rule by controlling the tempo. You let them think they're winning, just long enough for them to slip. That's when you squeeze. Stanfa started appointing made guys under his flag, legitimate earners, guys who didn't need gold chains or club appearances to feel powerful. They moved slow, smart, ran poker games, construction rackets, protection rings, always small scale. Just enough to taste, never enough to choke. That's the balance. He understood that. The young guys didn't. Not everyone welcomed his return. Some of the old Scarfo loyalists, what was left of them, felt they still deserved a piece. They tried to muscle into his operations, shake down a union foreman here, rough up a numbers runner there, testing the line. John didn't bark, didn't send an army. He sent one man, Tony Russo, quiet, clean-shaven, drove a rusted Buick, looked like a schoolteacher, but there was something off about his eyes, like his soul had been put in someone else's body. Tony walked into a Scarfo hangout on Oregon Avenue, didn't raise his voice, just walked up to a table full of guys and put down a small black box. Nobody touched it. He opened it for them. Inside was a rolled-up dollar bill covered in blood and a picture of their old boss's tombstone. No words. He walked out. Nobody tested Stanfa again after that. Still, the streets whispered. Some said John was slipping, that he was too careful, too slow. But others saw the truth. He was resetting the game, reteaching a code that'd been forgotten in the noise. Still, cracks were forming. His own son, Joseph Stanfa, wasn't cut from the same cloth. Young, eager, but not wise. He wanted to prove himself, wanted to impress his father, but John knew. Some things can't be forced. Some men have the fire, but not the smoke. Joe started getting involved in small-time beefs, extorting people without checking in, threatening guys who were already paying tribute. Word got back to John. He didn't yell, didn't punish him publicly. He just looked him in the eye and said, "Don't confuse fear with respect." Joe didn't understand that line, not yet, but he would. Stanfa started feeling it in his bones, that pull, that quiet pressure that builds when you sit on a throne made of blood and favors. He didn't want war, he wanted control. But war doesn't ask permission. Tensions with the Merlino faction, now led by Joey Merlino, Vinny's hot-headed son, started simmering again. Joey was slick, flashy, the opposite of John in every way. He wore tight suits, smiled in public, and loved the attention. The media called him the Skinny Don. He liked it, ate it up. He started poking the bear, sent his guys to intimidate Stanfa's soldiers, stole territory, mocked the old ways, called John a dinosaur. It wasn't just disrespect, it was a challenge, and John knew war was coming. He sat alone in the back room of an old restaurant on 9th Street, the kind of place that hadn't changed its wallpaper in 40 years. He sipped black coffee. No sugar, no cream. Across from him, Salvatore Big Sal Vitron, one of his oldest allies, sat picking at a plate of pasta he hadn't touched. "They're pushing too hard," Sal said. John didn't answer. Sal looked up. "You wait too long, they'll think you're weak." John lit a cigarette. The flame from the match flickered against his face. "I'm not waiting," he said. "I'm watching." Sal leaned back. "Joey's got guys, young, dumb, and broke. That makes him dangerous." John nodded. "They're loud," he said. "Loud men die first." But in his gut, he felt it, the change, the shift in rhythm. This wasn't the Philly of the 60s or 70s. There were cameras now, wiretaps in vending machines, feds in your own funeral homes. You couldn't even say hello without someone recording it. The war wouldn't be like before. It would be fast, sloppy, and it would drag families into it, his family. He looked down at his hands, still thick, still strong, but slower now. The bones ached in the mornings. His breath came shorter when he climbed stairs. He had maybe a few years left, maybe less. He wasn't scared of dying. That was never the fear. He was scared of what would happen after. Would the streets fall to chaos again? Would everything he rebuilt be ripped apart by kids who didn't understand the weight of tradition? He had to act, but smart. First, he'd consolidate. He called a meeting. Not the whole family, just 5 men, trusted ones. He laid it out clear, lines in the sand, who controlled what, who answered to whom. Any disrespect from the Merlino crew was to be reported, not retaliated against. Not yet. He was baiting them. He wanted Joey to feel like he was winning, because when the time came to strike, it wouldn't be a warning shot, it'd be a funeral procession, but he'd need leverage. And that's when FBI agent Paul Harris came into the picture. Young, clean-cut, obsessive, and he was watching everything, not from afar, from inside. The thing about the FBI is, they don't knock like gangsters. They wait, they listen. They move like ghosts, file by file, wiretap by wiretap, slow as rot. Agent Paul Harris was one of those ghosts, clean-cut, no wedding ring. Drove a Ford like it was a religion, wore the same gray suit 5 days a week. He looked like a kid you wouldn't hire to park your car. But behind his eyes, obsession. That cold kind. The kind that doesn't flinch when things get messy. He had been watching the Philly mob scene since the Scarfo takedown. He was new back then, just a desk jockey helping with subpoenas. But he remembered the bodies, the arrogance, the silence that hung like smoke over every case that went nowhere. Stanfa was the new target now. But Stanfa wasn't Scarfo. He didn't bark. He didn't wave guns. He didn't walk into clubs like he owned them. He was quiet, which made Harris lean in closer. In early '92, Harris got the green light for full surveillance. Wires, taps, bugs in garages, in payphones, even in pizza shops. The Bureau called it Operation Thin Ice. They knew what they were walking on. The biggest score came from a guy no one expected to flip, Mike Rizzo, mid-level collector for Stanfa's gambling operation, divorced. Child support killing him, picked up on a DUI, then nailed with a gun charge 6 months later. 2 strikes. Then Harris showed him the third one, a picture of his 9-year-old daughter walking to school. No threat, just a reminder. You disappear, she doesn't get answers, Harris had said. Rizzo broke. They put a mic on him, tiny thing, size of a tooth, sewn into the lining of his denim jacket. For 6 months, he moved through Stanfa's network like a whisper, collected cash, delivered messages, and the whole time he was feeding it all to Harris. But Harris wasn't stupid. He didn't want little fish. He wanted to crack the foundation. What he didn't know, what Rizzo didn't tell him, was that Stanfa had started to suspect someone was leaking. And when Stanfa suspected something, he didn't say it. He tested it. It started small. Stanfa gave Rizzo a fake message, just a name, a location, a time, something minor, a pickup that never happened. 3 days later, Harris raided that exact building. That's all John needed. He didn't call Rizzo in, didn't confront him. Instead, he told Tony Russo to handle it. Tony didn't believe in words when a stare could do the job. He followed Rizzo for 3 days, waited until he dropped off cash at a strip mall in South Jersey. Then, he made him disappear. Simple. No mess, no body. Rizzo just vanished. Harris lost his wire. The Bureau panicked. They knew now. Stanfa was aware. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was how Harris felt about it. He wasn't scared. He was excited. Back in South Philly, John sat at the end of a long wooden table in the basement of his cousin's bakery. The air smelled like flour and burnt sugar. No windows, one flickering bulb. Across from him sat Joey Trano, a low-level earner who'd been running a numbers racket out of a laundromat. He'd been skimming, just a little, just enough to buy himself a second-hand Cadillac. John didn't yell, he just watched him. "You think I don't see?" he said, voice low, tired. Joey's hands trembled a little. "I didn't mean—" "You don't have to mean it," John cut in. "You just have to do it." Then came silence. Long, cold. John leaned in, his voice like gravel wrapped in silk. "Go home. Don't come back." Joey looked confused, relieved. But John wasn't done. He turned to Tony Russo. 2 hours, he said. "Make it look like a robbery." Joey never made it out of South Philly that night. These were the moves John made when he felt the walls breathing. Not loud, not reckless, just enough. He didn't trust many anymore. Even his own son, Joseph, had become a question mark. Joe had started talking big again, hanging around clubs in Northeast Philly, showing up drunk to meetings, telling girls he was the next Don. John warned him once. "You talk like that again, I won't bury you. I'll forget you." But Joseph didn't believe him. Not really. That was the problem with sons. They grow up thinking they're born from steel. They forget their fathers were made in fire. Meanwhile, Harris got creative. If he couldn't get a wire in, he'd get one near. They bugged Stanfa's barber, the back room at the gym where some of his guys met, and even his mistress's apartment. Nothing big came through, just fragments, names, numbers. But Harris knew something was coming. Then, in the summer of '92, it happened. A drive-by. Stanfa's convoy was ambushed while heading down I-676. 3 cars, 2 shooters, automatic fire, midday traffic. Bullets ripped through the front car. John's driver caught 2 in the chest, dead on the spot. But John? He was in the second car, untouched. The message was clear. Joey Merlino was done talking. He wanted the throne. That night, the streets were silent. Even the rats in the alleys seemed to hold their breath. Stanfa didn't go to war immediately. He called a meeting, not a big one, just 3 men. Tony Russo, Big Sal, and Carmine Gallo, an outsider from Brooklyn, now running money through construction sites in Jersey. They met in the basement of an old furniture store. John sat at the head. He didn't pace, he didn't curse, he just leaned back and lit a cigarette. "Joey wants a war," he said. "So we give him a funeral instead." He laid out the plan in pieces, not all at once. No flashy hits, no bodies in the street. This had to be surgical. Kill the earners first, cut off his money, then isolate him. Make his own people doubt him. It wasn't revenge, it was tactics. But something was wrong. Gallo didn't speak much, just nodded too much. That night, after the meeting, John pulled Tony aside. "Watch him." Tony nodded once. In the following weeks, 4 Merlino guys disappeared. Not shot, not dumped, just gone. Word spread. Joey started getting paranoid, moved with 2 cars, wore a vest even to funerals. But his temper didn't cool. He blamed everyone. He even beat one of his own guys for looking at him wrong in a bar. And John? He waited, he sipped espresso, read the paper, let the fear do the work. But fear has a timeline. Too long, and it turns to anger. And that's when Joey snapped. One early morning in September, a bomb went off under a car belonging to Sal Vitrone's nephew. It was parked outside his South Philly row home. The blast shook the street, tore the windows out of nearby houses. The kid, 24. He was alive, but barely. Burned, broken, mute. John visited the hospital himself, stood at the foot of the bed, said nothing. The boy couldn't speak, but he looked at John like he was asking why. John didn't blink. He already knew the answer. He called Tony Russo that same night. No words, just handed him a folded piece of paper, a name, a location, a date, and 4 words. Do it, no mercy. By now the FBI was boiling. They could feel the war, but couldn't see it. Bodies weren't dropping in alleys. No one was talking. Harris pushed harder. He started tailing Stanfa personally, tried getting a warrant for John's house, denied. He started interviewing former associates, old-timers, guys who'd retired to Florida and didn't want to get involved. Most of them hung up. One guy, though, didn't. Frankie Knuckles D'Amico used to run numbers for Bruno, now ran a cigar shop in Tampa. He gave Harris a line that stuck. "You don't catch Stanfa by chasing him. You catch him by watching who disappears when he's in the room." The game was shifting. The feds were closing in. Joey was out for blood. And inside Stanfa's own circle, loyalty was cracking. Tony came to John late one night, quiet. "I don't trust Gallo," John nodded. "I know." Tony paused, then added, "He's been talking to someone. Calls from a payphone near Camden every Friday night." John didn't speak for a while. Then, finally, "Let him keep talking." Tony raised an eyebrow. John stared into the dark street outside the window. "If he's talking," he said, "he's not listening." The truth about betrayal is simple. It never comes from your enemies. Enemies announce themselves. They curse your name. They throw bricks through your windows and bullets through your windshield. But friends? Friends shake your hand with one arm and tighten the noose with the other. And John Stanfa knew. He was surrounded by friends. Carmine Gallo was slick in the way New York guys always tried to be. Tailored suits, cologne you could smell before he walked in, hair slicked back like he thought he was in a Scorsese movie. He smiled too much, laughed when no one else did, talked with his hands, but his eyes stayed cold. He'd come down from Brooklyn 2 years ago, ran money through drywall contracts, controlled 2 waste disposal sites in Jersey, and had a cousin married into the Gambino family. On paper, he was solid. Made money, paid tribute, kept things quiet, but something was off. Tony Russo had been watching. He kept track, noted every late meeting, every whispered phone call, every nervous glance at the wrong moment. He followed Gallo twice, once to a strip mall outside Camden, the second time to a payphone 2 blocks from an abandoned warehouse. Friday nights, always Friday nights. He'd speak for exactly 4 minutes, then disappear. The calls weren't to New York. They were local. Stanfa didn't move fast, not with betrayal. He believed in letting guilt rise slow, like dough in the dark. You wait. You let the traitor feel safe. Then you snatch the breath right out of his throat. But this wasn't just about one rat. This was a pattern. Something was leaking, and the feds were circling closer. On a chilly morning in late October, John walked into St. Lucy's Church, an old brick building with cracked walls and fading paint. He liked it there. No cameras, no wires, just silence and stained glass. He sat in the last pew, hands folded. The priest, Father Matteo, nodded once and walked out the back, giving him space. Tony slipped in 10 minutes later, sat beside him. "They made another arrest," Tony whispered. "Who?" "Paulie Garza, one of Merlino's guys. Got picked up on weapons charges. He's talking." John didn't flinch. "Garza doesn't know anything," he said, "but someone does." Tony hesitated, then added, "And Frankie Bruno's gone." "Gone where?" "FBI protection. His cousin works at the courthouse. Says they moved him last night. No charges yet. Just vanished." John sighed through his nose, rubbed the bridge of it like an old man fighting a headache that wasn't just physical. Bruno was small, not dangerous, but he'd been around long enough to see things, hear things, and scared men don't remember what's important. They just talk until someone shuts them up. Stanfa lit a match, let it burn until the flame kissed his thumb. "I want Gallo followed, not just his car, his girl, his driver, his cousin in Cherry Hill, everyone. If he breathes too loud, I want to hear it echo." Tony nodded. "And Joey?" he asked. John smiled, thin and bitter. "Joey thinks he's winning." Meanwhile, Joey Merlino was getting louder, flashier. He'd started showing up to clubs with 2 bodyguards, 3 girls, and a stupid smile. His suits got tighter, his mouth ran longer. He called himself the Prince of South Philly now. Guys laughed at first, but they started listening too, because Joey had something John didn't have anymore: youth. He had energy, money, and fearlessness, or maybe just stupidity. He promised promotions, promised territory, promised a new era without all the old rules. And the young guys? They ate it up. They didn't want to wait 20 years to earn. They wanted now. And Joey? He didn't care about old codes. He just wanted the seat. One night, Joey pulled a stunt. He walked into Vincent's Steakhouse, a joint that was under Stanfa's control, sat at a front table, ordered wine, and tipped the waiter $500 in cash. "You tell John," he said, loud enough for the kitchen to hear. "This table belongs to me now." The waiter didn't say a word, but the walls did. And they whispered all the way back to Stanfa. Tony wanted to hit back, hard. He pitched the idea to John 2 days later. "We clip one of his guys in front of that steakhouse, make it loud." John just shook his head. "You don't win chess by flipping the board." Tony frowned. "This ain't chess." John looked at him then, long and slow. "It's always chess, you just don't see the pieces." At the same time, something else was slipping, something closer, more dangerous than Joey or the FBI. His son, Joseph Stanfa, had stopped showing up to meetings. He was sleeping in hotels, racking up bills, and spending nights with women who had no last names. John heard things: coke, pills, anger issues. He called Joseph in one night, just the 2 of them. A quiet apartment above the bakery. Joseph came in with bloodshot eyes, wearing a gold chain and a shirt too loud for the room. "Sit," John said. Joseph flopped into the chair like a teenager who didn't care what came next. "You think this is a joke?" John asked. Joseph shrugged. "I'm handling things." John nodded slowly, lit a cigarette, took a long drag. "Then tell me, why are my men calling me at midnight about your messes?" Joseph rolled his eyes. "They're soft." "No," John said, "you're reckless." Joseph stood up, too fast, too dramatic. "I'm your son. That should mean something." "It does," John said, voice like ice. "That's why you're still breathing." Joseph froze, and in that moment the silence felt heavier than any scream. John stood up, took a step closer. "Being my son doesn't protect you. It burdens you. And if you embarrass this family again, I won't clean up your mess, I'll bury it." Joseph didn't speak. He left without saying a word. But in his eyes, something broke. The next week, Gallo made a mistake. He called the payphone again. Same time, same corner. But this time, Tony was waiting in the laundromat across the street. Camera, recorder, eyes locked. And the man who picked up the other end? FBI agent Paul Harris. Tony didn't need more than that. He brought the tape to John that same night. John played it once, twice, said nothing. Then, quietly, "He dies tomorrow." But fate doesn't wait. That same night, Harris got a tip, anonymous call, one line. They're gonna hit Gallo, fast, get there first. So Harris moved, fast, sent a unit to pick up Gallo, midnight snatch, quiet, clean. By morning, Gallo was gone, protective custody. Another ghost. Another named John would never get to cross off the list. By now, the media had caught on. Mob war brewing in Philly, one headline read. Old Don versus New Blood, said another. Stanfa's name was back in the papers, exactly where he didn't want it. And the worst part? Joey was loving it. He started feeding reporters, calling them, smiling in photos outside court. John saw the news one morning, watched Joey laugh into a camera, throwing kisses like he was running for office. He didn't get angry. He just stared at the screen, then turned to Tony. War it is. That night, John called in 5 of his most trusted men. He laid out the plan. 4 targets, 4 days, each one tied to Joey. No more warnings, no more whispers. Now it was blood, but clean, controlled, surgical. And that was the start, not of chaos, not yet. That was the start of Stanfa's campaign, the return of an old-school Don who believed in balance, but would burn a city to protect the throne. Because now, this wasn't business, this was personal. They say war is loud. But Stanfa's kind of war started in whispers. It began with a name on a napkin, then another. 4 names, 4 days, each man hand-picked, not because they were powerful, but because they were pillars in Joey Merlino's growing empire. Remove the pillars, the house falls. That was the plan. No drive-bys, no bombs, no stray bullets hitting kids in the crossfire. That was Joey's style. Flashy, stupid, reckless. Stanfa wanted surgical cuts, bleed them from the inside out. Target 1, Anthony Tonton Moroni, small-time enforcer, ran collections from Merlino in West Philly, known for his mouth, bragged at bars. Told dancers he was untouchable. John hated men like that, men who thought fear was the same thing as respect. Tonton ran a predictable schedule. Tuesday nights, 8 p.m. sharp, he played cards in the back room of a deli on 57th Street. John didn't send a team, just one man. Luca, the mule, Ventresca, heavy-built, neck thick as a tree trunk, eyes dead like still water. He didn't talk much, just showed up, parked across the street, waited. Tonton came out laughing, cigarette in his mouth, jacket flung over his shoulder like he didn't have a care in the world. Luca walked across the street and shot him twice in the stomach, once in the neck. No yelling, no running, just 3 thuds. People screamed, sure, but it was already done. Luca didn't speed off. He walked back to the car and drove away like he was late for lunch. By the time police arrived, the blood was dry. Target 2, Mario Castaldi, mid-level earner, handled Merlino's sportsbook out of a car wash, married, 2 kids, lived in the suburbs like he wasn't a criminal. Tony Russo said he was the brains behind Merlino's new loan scheme. Quiet guy, clean hands. But without him, Joey's money pipeline got clogged. Stanfa didn't want him dead, he wanted him afraid. So they went a different route. Wednesday morning, Mario kissed his wife goodbye and drove to work. On the way, a black van clipped the back of his car and forced him off the road. Before he could get out, 2 masked men pulled him from the vehicle, beat him with a tire iron, and shoved something in his mouth. When he woke up in the hospital, his front teeth were gone, and there was a note taped to his chest. Sit this war out, or your kids ride next. Mario left Philly that night, disappeared without a word, exactly how John wanted it. Target 3, Dominic Dom Salerno. He ran a nightclub on Delaware Avenue, mostly drugs and girls. He was flashy, loud, and worse. He owed Joey money, which made him a perfect message. Stanfa didn't want Dom just gone. He wanted the world to watch him fall. So Friday night, around 1-2 a.m., while Dom stood outside his club surrounded by hangers-on and 2 security guards, a black BMW pulled up slow. Driver never got out, just unloaded a full clip through the window. 6 shots, 1 miss, 5 hits. Dom collapsed face first onto the curb, a spilled drink still in his hand. People screamed. The club emptied. Cameras caught it all. By morning, it was all over the news. Mob tensions explode. Nightclub owner gunned down outside venue. John watched the report with his coffee. No smile, just a quiet nod. Target 4, Carmine Greco. Now this one was personal. Carmine wasn't muscle. He wasn't money. He was a whisperer. The kind of man who convinced other men to switch sides. He'd been recruiting some of Stanfa's lower-tier earners, promising them better cuts under Joey, calling the old man dead weight, offering futures with a man who knew where the world was going. Stanfa took it personally. Betrayal wasn't always a bullet. Sometimes it was an idea. He sent Tony Russo himself. Saturday night, Carmine was coming out of a bar in South Jersey, tipsy, laughing, lighting a cigarette. Tony didn't shoot him, didn't beat him. He walked up, said his name. Carmine turned, startled. Tony handed him an envelope. Inside were 5 photos, one of Carmine's wife, one of his son, 3 of his mistress, different angles, different times. Tony said nothing, just turned and walked away. Carmine left town within 24 hours, stopped answering Joey's calls, put his house up for sale, just like that. Another one gone. Within a week, Joey's world started shrinking. Guys stopped showing up to meetings. Money slowed. Fear crept in. He couldn't laugh it off anymore. He tried calling press again, tried to make it look like he was still in control. But you could see it in his eyes. He was rattled. And John. He hadn't left his neighborhood once. Still, there was one name on the list that hadn't been crossed out. Joseph Stanfa, John's own son. He hadn't betrayed him, not officially. But something was wrong. He'd stopped returning calls. Started meeting strange people, dressing like someone else, talking like someone else. John called him in again, this time in a room above a funeral home. The air smelled like roses and ammonia. Joseph walked in, stoned, half asleep. John stared at him for a long time. "You think I'm the enemy now?" he asked. Joseph scoffed. "I think you don't know what the fuck you're doing." That silence afterward, it was final. John stood up, lit a cigarette. The flame glowed just enough to light the disappointment in his eyes. "I built this city," he said, "and I'd tear it down before I let a junkie son burn it behind my back." Joseph looked ready to spit, but John raised a finger. "You want to run? Run." He opened the door. "But don't come back. Not ever." Joseph stood there a moment like he didn't know if it was a bluff. It wasn't. He left, and didn't look back. Tony asked later if they should watch him. John shook his head. "No," he said. "Let the world do what it wants with him. I'm done." And just like that, he cut his own blood loose. Because in this war, there were no sons, no friends, only soldiers. The hits were effective, but they were also loud. And the FBI, they weren't sleeping anymore. Paul Harris watched the chaos unfold like a chessboard catching fire. He knew something bigger was coming. He just didn't know when. But what he did know was this: the bodies weren't just dropping. They were being placed, with intention, with message. Stanfa wasn't reacting. He was orchestrating. Back in Joey Merlino's camp, paranoia took over. He started accusing his own guys of betrayal. Fired one of his drivers for breathing weird. Had 2 of his collectors beaten for holding back. People started disappearing, but not because of Stanfa, because Joey was unraveling. He tried reaching out to the New York families for help, tried to get muscle from the Bronx, but the response was cold. "No one wants to back a clown in a crown," one message read. And Joey? He was still bleeding, still cocky, but now for the first time, he was alone. And John? He sat at the edge of the fire he had lit, sipping espresso like it was water. The old-school Godfather, patient, brutal, methodical, cutting the future down before it even had a name. But the war wasn't over. Not yet. There were still cards to play. And the next name on the list wasn't just one of Joey's men. It was someone inside Stanfa's own crew. Because betrayal, it never ends. It just changes its face. There's a saying in the old world, The wolf closest to the sheep is the one wearing your coat. John Stanfa lived by that. He wasn't scared of Joey Merlino. Joey was loud, reckless, and easy to read. But the one who smiles too much, the one who volunteers too fast, the one who nods before you finish the sentence, that one you watch, that one you test, that one kills you from the inside. After the hits on Joey's crew, everything should have quieted down. But something was off. Things started leaking again. Not big things, just details. A name would get mentioned in a meeting, and the FBI would pick that guy up 2 days later. A drop location would shift, and suddenly there'd be surveillance vans on the corner. It was subtle, but Stanfa noticed. He always noticed. And worse, he noticed how fast the news moved, faster than it should. That meant the leak wasn't just a fringe guy. It wasn't some street-level earner getting nervous. This was someone inside, someone close. Stanfa sat in the back of his favorite bakery, the one on 10th Street, and stared out the dusty window for nearly an hour. The streets were quiet. A cold wind slid through the cracks of the glass. Outside, kids chased a half-flat soccer ball across the street. Tony Russo sat across from him, smoking slow, eyes narrowed. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" Tony asked. John didn't blink. "Yeah." "You want to say it?" "No." Tony took a drag and exhaled slow. Then, with a flat voice, he said, Salvatore Vitrone. Big Sal. John had known him for 40 years, came up under Bruno together, worked construction in the 70s, shook down politicians in the 80s, and rebuilt the rackets in the 90s. Sal had history. He had trust. He was family in everything but blood. But lately, he'd started changing. He showed up late to meetings. He talked too much, repeated conversations that didn't need to be repeated. He started asking questions about things he already knew the answers to. Subtle, but enough to raise a red flag, enough for John to say, "Let's test him." They didn't do anything drastic. John simply mentioned, in front of Sal only, that they'd be holding a cash meet near Pier 45 the following Tuesday. It was a lie, just a fishing line in murky water. 3 days later, feds raided Pier 45. Didn't catch anyone, but they were ready. Full team. They weren't guessing. They were told. And John, he didn't say a word to Sal. He just leaned back in his chair that night and said, "You were right." Tony nodded. "What do we do?" John flicked the ash off his cigarette. "We squeeze him." They gave Sal a little space to dig his own grave. Let him feel safe. Let him believe no one was watching. Then they sent in Enzo Morelli, young, dumb, and useful. Enzo approached Sal with a fake problem, a made-up debt from a guy in Jersey who owed too much and had started talking reckless. Sal listened, told Enzo he'd take care of it, told him not to worry. Then, 3 days later, that same Jersey guy was picked up by the FBI for questioning. Another leak. Too fast. Too specific. Tony brought the news back, jaw tight. "It's him." John didn't answer at first. He just stood, walked to the window, and stared into the night. "I gave that man everything," he finally said. "He kissed my wife's cheek at her funeral." Tony stood beside him. "Then let me do it." John shook his head. "No." Tony blinked. "You sure?" John looked at him. "He's mine." Sal didn't see it coming. That was the cruel part. He walked into the room above the deli on 9th Street smiling like it was any other Thursday. "Got your favorite," he said, placing a bottle of Chianti on the table. "The one from Sicily." John just nodded. They sat, talked small things, weather, old times, a story about Bruno that made them both chuckle. And then, John said it. "I trusted you." Sal froze. "What?" "I trusted you," John repeated, "and you gave them my house." Sal's face didn't move for a second. Then he laughed. It wasn't a nervous laugh. It was broken, like something inside him snapped. "You think I flipped?" John didn't respond. Sal stood. "After everything we did, you think I'd sell you out to a Fed?" John just stared. Then finally, "I don't think it." "I know it." Sal sat back down, slowly, The air between them got thicker, warmer, tighter. "You don't know what it's like," Sal said. "Living every day like a target, wondering if today's the day some punk wants to make a name by blowing your brains out over a parking spot." John's face stayed blank. "I buried 3 friends in the last year, John. 3. And not one of them saw it coming." John finally spoke. "So you figured you'd cash in before it was your turn?" Sal's hands trembled now. "I didn't give them everything," he said. "That's worse." "You're an old man," Sal snapped suddenly, his voice cracking. "You're chasing a war that doesn't belong to you anymore. These kids, they don't play by your rules. They don't care about codes. They care about Instagram and coke and fast money. You're fighting ghosts, John, and I didn't want to be the next one." Silence. Then John stood, walked over slowly. He placed his hand on Sal's shoulder. "Look at me," he said. Sal did, and in that one moment, the years vanished. 2 old men at the edge of an empire they built, now crumbling under their own memories. "I forgive you," John whispered. Sal exhaled, like a weight fell off his chest. Then, John drew the pistol from his coat and shot him once in the chest, point blank. Sal fell back in his chair, wine bottle tipping, blood spreading across his shirt like spilled ink. John stood over him, face like stone. "No one survives the family," he said. Then he walked out. Tony cleaned it up, said Sal had a heart attack. They buried him 2 days later. Small funeral, closed casket. John didn't attend, but he sent roses. Inside, though, it cut deep. Sal was the last piece of Bruno's crew, the last link to the old way. Now, John was truly alone. FBI agent Paul Harris heard the news through one of his informants. "Sal's gone," the guy said. "Heart attack." Harris didn't buy it. The timing was too clean. And the Pier 45 raid, that was the last good lead they had. Now it was gone. Stanfa had cleaned house. And Harris knew this war wasn't winding down. It was changing gears. Meanwhile, Joey Merlino watched the news about Sal and smiled. "That's one less ghost haunting me," he said to his guys. But his smile didn't last long, because what he didn't know was that Stanfa was already planning the next strike. This time, not soldiers, not friends, family, and the name at the top of the list, Joseph Stanfa. John Stanfa never believed in nightmares, he believed in memory. Nightmares fade, memories stay, especially the bad ones. They came in silence, in smell, in stillness, the scent of gun oil, the creak of leather shoes on tile, the hiss of a lighter in a quiet room, triggers. And lately, the memories were louder, because no matter how much blood he spilled, how many names he crossed out, one name kept floating to the top. Joseph, his son, his blood, his shame. Tony Russo brought the news in a plain envelope. He didn't say much, just slid it across the table in John's basement office and walked out. Inside were photos, grainy but clear enough. Joseph Stanfa, meeting with Vinny Balzano, one of Merlino's enforcers, twice. Different days, different cars, same mistake. One photo had Joseph smiling. Another showed him handing something off. Envelope, maybe cash. Hard to tell. But that didn't matter. The image was enough. Loyalty doesn't shake hands with enemies. John sat with the envelope in front of him for over an hour. Didn't open it again. Didn't move. Just sat. Like stone. Later that night, he walked alone to the church on Passyunk. Not to pray. He hadn't believed in prayer since his wife died. He just sat in the pew, hands folded, not talking to God, but maybe listening for him. The walls whispered with old incense and candle smoke. He thought about his wife, her eyes, her voice, her warnings. "Joseph's too soft," she once said. He used to argue, say the boy just needed time. But maybe she was right. Maybe Joseph wasn't soft. Maybe he was just a coward, and worse than that. Maybe he was stupid. The next morning, John called in Tony. "Bring him," he said. Tony didn't ask who. He already knew. They found Joseph at a hotel in South Jersey. One of those mid-tier joints, fake wood paneling, thin carpets, bedspreads you didn't touch with bare skin. He opened the door, half drunk, shirt wrinkled, eyes red. "Uncle Tony," he said, smirking like a kid who forgot he wasn't 10 anymore. "What's the occasion?" Tony didn't answer, just stepped in and shut the door behind him. "Your father wants to see you." Joseph rolled his eyes. "Of course he does." They drove back in silence. Joseph played with the window button, up, down, nervous twitch. Tony just stared ahead, hands on the wheel, jaw tight. They pulled up to the old funeral home. John was already inside, waiting, same chair, same table, same cold stare. Tony pushed the door open and nodded. Joseph stepped in like a teenager getting called to the principal's office, trying to fake swagger he didn't feel. "Hey, Pop." John didn't answer, just stared. The envelope was still on the table. Joseph saw it. His eyes flicked barely, but John caught it. "Sit," John said. Joseph did. "You want to explain this?" John asked, voice flat as ice. Joseph leaned back. "What, you got the feds tailing me now? Paranoid much?" John pushed the envelope forward. "Vinny Balzano." Joseph scoffed. "I ran into him at a bar. That's not a crime." "Twice," John said. 2 bars, 2 meetings, 1 envelope handed off. Joseph said nothing. John leaned in. "I built this city. Every corner, every crew. I buried friends to protect what I made. And you, my blood, you go behind my back and deal with children." Joseph's face changed, not fear. Resentment. "I'm not your errand boy anymore," he snapped. "I'm not some stone you carved into a statue. I'm a grown man, and I'm sick of kissing your ring." John's eyes narrowed. "Is that what this is? A rebellion?" "No," Joseph said. "It's reality. Your time's over. These kids, they don't care about your codes, your silence, your war stories. They want what works now." John's jaw flexed. "And Joey works?" Joseph smiled. "Joey listens?" That's when it happened. John stood, slow, every motion deliberate. He walked around the table. Joseph stayed seated, still trying to play it cool, but his eyes flicked. John stopped behind him. "You know what listening gets you in this life?" he said low. Joseph didn't answer. John leaned in, his mouth near his son's ear. Dead. Then he straightened. "Get out." Joseph turned to look up. "What?" "Get out," John repeated. "You're not my son, not anymore." Joseph stood, face flush. "You can't erase blood." John's voice dropped. "I can erase anything." Joseph left, but the war inside John stayed. He wanted to kill him. He wanted to forgive him. He wanted to wake up 20 years ago, before the money, before the title, before his name became a sentence. But time doesn't walk backwards. And ghosts don't bury themselves. Tony returned an hour later. John was still standing in the same spot. "Well?" Tony asked. "I let him walk." Tony paused. "For now." John nodded once. "Watch him." Meanwhile, the FBI had its own problems. Paul Harris had lost 2 informants in a month. Rizzo, vanished. Gallo, in protection but silent. Every wiretap picked up noise but no movement. Then came the tip. Anonymous call. "Joseph Stanfa is ready to talk." Harris froze. It was the one thing he didn't expect. Not because Joseph was loyal, but because Joseph was invisible. Now, he was knocking on the front door. 2 nights later, Joseph sat in the back of a black SUV on Market Street, parked 3 blocks from the Federal Building. Across from him, Paul Harris. Joseph looked tired, not fake tired, real tired, like someone who hadn't slept in weeks. "You want protection?" Harris asked. Joseph shook his head. "No, just options." Harris waited. Joseph leaned forward. "My father's going to die. Whether it's Joey or the feds, he's going down. And when he does, someone has to run things. It can be me." Harris raised an eyebrow. "You want us to take your dad down so you can take his spot?" Joseph smiled. "Welcome to Philadelphia." The meeting lasted 40 minutes. Joseph didn't give anything critical, no locations, no hard evidence. But what he gave was leverage. And leverage is sometimes more dangerous than truth. Back at Stanfa's place, Tony Russo got a call from a bartender he had on payroll in South Philly. Said Joseph had been bragging, talking to someone about being untouchable now. Tony brought the info to John. John just closed his eyes. I should have killed him 10 years ago, he said. Tony stayed quiet. Bring him in? He asked. John shook his head. Not yet. Why not? John looked at him. Because if I do it now, it'll be personal. That night, John went to the old church again. He didn't pray. He just sat, thinking. His wife used to light a candle every week for Joseph, even after he dropped out of school, even after the drugs, even after the lies. She believed in him. John didn't. Not anymore. But even in his disgust, even in his fury, he hadn't ordered the hit, not yet, but someone would. And if it wasn't him, it might be Joey Merlino, because betrayal is a two-way street. And now, Joseph had crossed both lanes. Joseph Stanfa believed he was smarter than everyone else, smarter than his father, smarter than the FBI, smarter than Joey Merlino. In his head, he was the future, a man standing between dying dinosaurs, watching them collapse while he climbed up over their bones. But what he didn't understand, what his father had tried, too late, to teach him, was this. In the life, you don't rise by playing both sides. You rise by surviving one of them. After his backroom meeting with Agent Paul Harris, Joseph started getting bolder. He showed up at clubs again, wore a suit he couldn't afford. Told girls his father was passing the torch. He made phone calls in public places, took meetings in daylight. He thought the feds would protect him, and that Joey needed him. And for a while, it looked like he was right. Joey Merlino's crew started circling him like flies around sugar. Vinny Balzano brought him in for drinks at a steakhouse in Jersey. Another Merlino guy offered him a girl in a car, just for being smart. They laughed at his jokes, treated him like royalty. But in the shadows, they were watching, and laughing for different reasons. Joey didn't trust him, not really. He told Vinny the truth one night after too much wine and too little caution. You don't marry the daughter of a man you hate, and you don't bring his son to dinner unless you're thinking about killing him after dessert. Joseph was a tool. That's all. A distraction, a wedge, something Joey could use to embarrass Stanfa publicly, to humiliate him as a father and a boss, and then throw away like garbage. Back at the bureau, Paul Harris was getting restless. Joseph had fed them scraps, old roots, names already in files, vague mentions of stashed cash and smuggled goods, but nothing actionable, nothing that would hold up in court. And that made Harris nervous. He started wondering if Joseph was playing him too. The game was getting dangerous. Because now, everyone wanted Joseph dead. Joey wanted to make a statement. The feds wanted to bury their embarrassment. And John had already buried the last of his feelings. Now, he just needed the timing. It came from a phone call. Tony Russo answered it, midnight. Gravelly voice on the other end, one of his old informants from inside Merlino's crew. Joseph's meeting Joey, private sit-down, tomorrow night, 11 p.m., rooftop of the Vincenzo Hotel. Tony hung up. He called John. What do you want me to do? There was a long pause. Then John answered, quiet. Let them meet. I want to see which one walks off the roof. Joseph got the call that afternoon. It was Vinny. Joey wants to meet you. Just you and him. No guards, no noise. Joseph smiled like a kid hearing he'd been invited to the grown-up table. He dressed sharp. Dark slacks, navy blazer, shiny shoes. No tie, to look casual, confident. He sprayed cologne twice and checked himself in the mirror 3 times. He walked into that hotel like a man with a plan. But by the time he stepped onto the rooftop, he was already dead. Joey was waiting, leaned against the railing, cigarette in hand. City lights behind him, wind tossing his shirt collar like it knew a storm was coming. Joseph tried to act calm. You alone? He asked. Joey nodded. Just us. Joseph stepped forward, hands in his pockets. Good. I wanted to talk. Joey turned. About what? Joseph smirked. About legacy. That word, legacy, made Joey laugh, loud and hard. You think this is about legacy? He flicked the cigarette. You're a junkie with a famous last name. Joseph stepped closer. I could help you run the city. I know my father's roots. His guards, his bank accounts. I'm worth more alive. Joey raised an eyebrow. No, he said, stepping closer too. You're not. Joseph tensed. I came here in good faith. You came here thinking you were safe, Joey interrupted. Because you think talking to the feds makes you untouchable. Because you think walking away from your father makes you something more than just his shadow. Joseph's face hardened. I'm smarter than him. No, you're not, Joey said. He made mistakes. But you? You are a mistake. Joseph reached for something in his jacket, maybe just a cigarette, maybe something more. Didn't matter. Joey drew his pistol and shot him once in the stomach. Joseph stumbled back, gasping, hands covered in blood, eyes wide with disbelief. Another shot, this time in the shoulder. He fell to his knees. Joey walked over, stood above him. You think you're the future, he said, voice cold. The future's got no room for traitors. Then he raised the gun. Say hi to your mom. Bang! Final shot went through the eye. Joseph's body hit the pavement 7 stories below, crushed a parked Nissan. Blood sprayed the sidewalk like it was trying to write something. Police arrived within minutes. Joey was gone. Security footage glitched. Cut out for 20 minutes. Inside job. Clean, quiet, classic. Back in South Philly, John Stanfa didn't flinch when he got the call. Tony stood in the doorway. It's done, he said. Joey beat us to it. John didn't look up from his drink, just nodded once. After a long pause, he finally said, better that it was him. Tony didn't ask why. He already knew. A father killing his son. That's a weight even a Don can't carry. The funeral was small. No press, no church, just a box, a hole, and a few men standing in the rain. Tony stood beside John. Not many showed. John didn't respond. He just stared at the grave. Finally, Tony asked, do you want to say something? John lit a cigarette. No. Then, after a long moment, he added, let him rot with his choices. The war should have ended there, but it didn't. Because Joseph's death didn't close a chapter. It opened a wound, a very public one. And now? Joey had taken something from John that couldn't be replaced. And John, he wasn't just fighting for power anymore. He was fighting for revenge. They buried Joseph on a Thursday. The rain came sideways, cold and bitter, like it was trying to wash the city clean of the name Stanfa. The casket was plain, dark wood, no flowers, no music, no priest, just mud and silence, and 4 men standing in wool coats, staring at a grave that meant more than any of them could say out loud. John didn't cry, didn't speak, didn't blink. He watched as the casket was lowered. Watched it disappear beneath the dirt, and when the last shovel of earth hit the lid, he turned and walked away like he'd just paid a bill, not buried his blood. Tony Russo followed behind, hands in his coat pockets, jaw locked tight. You good? He asked. John lit a cigarette, his hand steady as ever. Let's get to work, he said. The thing about John Stanfa was, even at 70-something, after losing his son, after decades of watching friends die and enemies rise, he still knew how to move like a ghost. And now? He moved with no chains on him, not family, not legacy, not mercy. He was free in the most dangerous way a man like him could be. And he was ready to burn everything. The first step was silence. No retaliation, no press, no late-night hits. Just 3 weeks of calm, intentional, controlled, calculated. Everyone thought he was grieving, licking his wounds, planning his exit. Even Joey thought he'd broken him. Old man's finished, he told his guys one night at the Raven Room. I did what he couldn't. I cleaned up his mess. He laughed, tipped the waitress $100, toasted to the future. But in the streets, whispers started moving. Stanfa's crew wasn't shrinking, it was multiplying. Old earners, silent for years, started showing up again. Men from New Jersey, from North Philly, from Trenton and Cherry Hill. Men who owed him, men who remembered how good things used to be. They weren't loyal because of money. They were loyal because they respected fear. And John, he was the most feared man in Philadelphia again. Tony called it the circle. A quiet gathering of 12. No phones, no notes, no last names. Each one in charge of 5 to 10 men. Rackets spread thin, underground, invisible. Nothing flashy, no drugs, no clubs, no night crawlers, just money, loyalty, and blood. They met in an old warehouse once a week, surrounded by rusted machines and dust, drinking espresso from paper cups, discussing who needed to disappear next. John didn't speak until the end. And when he did, he said only 3 words. Joey gets nothing. They started by cutting the supply lines, not drugs. Joey had other sources for that. They cut his cash. They hit his bookies. Quietly, each man given 2 choices, walk away or get buried. Most of them walked. The ones who didn't, they vanished. No bodies, just empty apartments, running water, and radios still playing sports talk in the background. Next, they hit his legit fronts. A dry cleaning chain, burned down in the middle of the night. A trucking company. All its drivers walked out in one day after Stanfa's men visited their families. A diner Joey had part ownership in. Bombed at 3 a.m., no casualties, just a message. You don't eat where we spit. Joey responded the only way he knew how, loud and messy. He sent 2 of his hitters after a man named Carlo Moretti, a known Stanfa associate who ran poker games out of his basement. They waited outside his house with Uzis like they were in a movie. Carlo never made it to his front steps. His wife found his body slumped over the steering wheel, engine still running, a red mess soaking the windshield. That same night, Merlino's crew left a message spray-painted on a brick wall in South Philly. Stanfa's next, but John didn't flinch. He didn't send a hit in response. Instead, he sent something worse. He sent Tony Russo to Joey's mother's house. Not to hurt her, to sit outside in a parked car for 6 straight hours, windows down, motor running, arms crossed. Nothing was said, nothing was done. But Joey got the call, and when he heard who was outside, he went pale. Because this was no longer about control, no longer about turf or money. This was about psychological dominance. John wanted Joey to know what it felt like to live under the sword. By the end of the 4th week, Joey couldn't move without looking over his shoulder. He changed cars 3 times, switched phones 5, moved homes twice, still didn't sleep. He started seeing ghosts. One night, he woke up and drew his gun on his own cousin, who came in with food. The paranoia cracked him open like a walnut. And Stanfa, still silent, still watching, still waiting for the moment to strike. That moment came in early spring. A warm day, birds in the air, people in short sleeves for the first time in months. A good day to die. Joey had arranged a meeting with 2 men from out of town, potential new suppliers from Baltimore. The sit-down was supposed to take place at a strip club in Northeast Philly. Private room, secure location, no heat. But Stanfa had been tipped off, not by a rat, by a camera. One of Joey's new hires, a hothead named Little Mikey, had posted a photo on social media from inside the club 2 nights earlier. John's guys saw it, recognized the wallpaper, recognized the bottle of whiskey, tracked it back to the club, made the connection, and John said 2 words, "Bring fire." At 11:17 p.m., Joey was sitting at a table with his new guests, laughing, drinking, bragging about his empire. He had no idea that 4 men in masks were already in the building. They came through the back door, no noise. 2 carried shotguns, 1 had a suppressed 9mm, the 4th carried a can of gasoline. The lights cut out first, then the screams, then the shots. Joey ducked under the table as one of his guests took a round to the chest. One of the masked men poured gasoline across the bar and set it ablaze. Within seconds, the place was chaos. Men scrambling, girls running, fire licking the walls. Joey got out, barely, but he left 2 bodies behind. And more than that, he left his reputation in ashes because word spread fast, Stanfa lit him up, and he lived. And that's the worst thing for a boss, to survive an attack meant to end you. It makes you look weak. Joey knew what was happening now. This wasn't just a fight. This wasn't just payback for Joseph. Stanfa was dismantling him, not with bullets, but with doubt. By the end of the week, 3 more of Joey's men had flipped. One of his bodyguards disappeared, last seen taking a bus out of state. Another crew started negotiating directly with Stanfa for neutrality. And Joey? He started drinking again. Hard, stopped showing up to meetings, paranoia turned to self-pity, and from his window, he saw shadows that weren't there. Meanwhile, John sat in his office surrounded by old photos, old memories, and silence. Tony brought in an envelope, details about Joey's current location, his habits, his weaknesses, laid it on the table. John didn't even look at it. "Not yet," he said. Tony nodded. "Why?" John finally looked up. "Because he's not scared enough." Joey Merlino sat alone in a rented apartment above a pawn shop on Oregon Avenue. The place smelled like mildew and microwave dinners. His old place, the sleek condo with the leather couch and the floor-to-ceiling windows, was gone. Too many eyes, too many shadows. He used to laugh at the thought of hiding. Used to swear he'd never live like the old-timers, jumping at every noise. But now, every car backfiring outside made him flinch. Every knock on the door made his chest tighten. He was 29, still in his prime, still flashy when the cameras were around. But inside, he was cracking. And the worst part? He knew it. The war had started with fire and noise. But now it was quiet. And quiet is what kills men like Joey. He was used to action, used to shooting back. Hitting first, moving fast. But Stanfa wasn't like that. The old man moved like a shadow, waited, watched, let the fear do the stabbing for him. Joey couldn't fight that. He tried. He sent hitters. They vanished. He tried calling in outside muscle. No one answered. New York had gone cold. Even his own guys were drifting. The club was half empty now. Meetings ended early. Cash was short. Whispers got louder. Joey's slipping. Stanfa's winning. Time to switch sides. He heard it all. And he felt it too. In the eyes of his crew, in the way his name didn't carry weight anymore. Respect was gone. And when you lose that, you've already lost the war. But Joey wasn't built to retreat. He wasn't built for patience. He was built for fire. And fire doesn't go out quietly. It started with a call to Vinny Balzano, his last loyal captain. "I want Russo," Joey said, voice raw. "I want that old bastard's pit bull in the ground." Vinny hesitated. "Tony's tight. Careful." "Then make him careless," Joey snapped. "How?" Joey paused, then said something he hadn't said in weeks. "We hurt somebody close." 2 days later, Tony Russo's younger brother, Eddie, disappeared. Eddie wasn't in the life. He was clean. Ran a small HVAC business, coached Little League. He never touched the family business. But that didn't matter now. All that mattered was pain. Tony found out on a Tuesday morning. Eddie's truck was still parked at his shop. Phone dead. No signs of struggle. Just gone. And Tony? He went still. Not angry, not loud. Just quiet. The kind of quiet that screams. He went to John that night. Face pale. Eyes empty. "He's gone." John nodded. "Joey?" Tony didn't ask how he knew. He already did. "What do you want to do?" Tony asked. John didn't answer immediately. He walked over to a cabinet in the corner of the room, opened it, pulled out a bottle of scotch and 2 glasses, poured slow, handed one to Tony. They drank, and then John said it. "We end him. No more chess, no more messages. This was now a death sentence." But Stanfa wasn't going to make the mistake of rushing. No, he would make Joey's fall biblical. Because this wasn't just about vengeance anymore. This was about justice, the old kind, the kind carved in blood. The first move came the next night. Vinny Balzano, Joey's last true soldier, got into his car after a late dinner in Cherry Hill. It didn't explode. No drama. Instead, he turned the ignition, started driving down the block, and realized he wasn't alone. 2 black SUVs cut him off at the next light. Men with masks stepped out. Vinny slammed the car in reverse, but too late. They dragged him out, beat him silent, and stuffed him into the back of a van. By morning, he was in the trunk of that same car, parked outside Joey's club, stripped down to his underwear, tape across his mouth, 1 finger missing. Pinned to his chest, a note. "You're next." Joey read it, hands shaking. He looked up, expecting cops, witnesses, something. But there was no one. Just silence. Joey lost 3 more guys that week. 2 flipped, 1 vanished. By Friday, half his crew was gone or hiding. He held a meeting in a diner basement. Only 4 showed. He screamed, threw chairs, slammed his fist on the table. "You think that old piece of Suez wins? He's done. He's fucking bones." But the men didn't look convinced. Not anymore. And then, Joey made the one move John was counting on. He tried to run. It happened on a Saturday morning. Joey loaded a bag with cash, burner phones, a passport. He had a plan: fly to Florida, lay low, regroup, maybe reach out to someone in Vegas. He told no one, took a taxi to the airport. But when he reached the terminal, he froze. Because standing near gate 14, reading a newspaper, was Tony Russo. Not hiding, not armed, just watching. Joey turned around immediately, backed out of the terminal, got into another cab. "Drive," he barked, "anywhere." But no matter where he went, he saw shadows. The war wasn't just following him now, it was inside him. Meanwhile, Stanfa was already working the final phase. He called in Rico Palermo, an old hitman from the Bruno days, retired, quiet, living out in Lancaster. He owed John a favor. "Last job," John said. "Just one." Rico didn't even ask who, just nodded. 1 week later, Rico was inside Joey's apartment building, dressed as a repairman, keys to every door, waiting. But the hit didn't go clean, because Joey didn't show up. Instead, a kid, a new driver Joey had hired, walked in and took 2 in the chest before Rico realized it wasn't him. Joey had switched spots at the last minute. Paranoia, again, saving his life. For now. The failed hit made the news. Mob war escalates. Another man shot in alleged Stanfa-Merlino feud. Harris at the bureau saw it and shook his head. They were losing control. Too many bodies, too much silence, and worse, too many people rooting for Stanfa. Because in the streets, people respected what he was doing. They didn't love the violence, but they understood it. Joey was a clown. John was a code. The final straw came when Joey found a photo in his mailbox. Just a simple black and white shot. A grave, freshly dug, no name, no flowers, just dirt. Underneath it, handwritten, "Make peace with God." That night, Joey called one last meeting. Only 2 men showed. He laid it out, said they'd strike back full force, hit Stanfa directly, not the crew, not Tony, him. The men nodded. But inside, they were already gone. One would leave town the next morning, the other would call Tony Russo. Back in South Philly, John sat with Tony and Rico, drinking coffee in the kitchen of the bakery that had seen more blood than dough in the last year. He looked older now, not weaker, just tired. But his eyes, still fire. "Joey's out of moves," Tony said. "He's still breathing," John replied. "Not for long." John took a slow sip. "Make it clean." Joey Merlino wasn't hiding, not officially. But every night he stayed behind a different locked door. Every morning he opened his eyes expecting to see shadows on the wall that didn't belong to him. He'd stopped sleeping in beds, too vulnerable. Started sleeping on couches in basements with pistols resting on his chest. Every sound outside became a bullet. Every knock became death's fingers tapping. He had money. He had a few guns. But he didn't have the one thing he used to carry like a shield: control. And without that, he wasn't a boss. He was a target. Across the city, John Stanfa was writing his final chapter. But he wasn't rushing it. No guns blazing, no suicide mission. He wanted permanence. He wanted the kind of ending that didn't just close a door. It bricked it shut, set fire to the hinges, and salted the earth beneath it. And for that, he needed a setup that could only work once. One chance, one move. No mistakes. He had the intel. He had the shooters. All he needed was Joey to take the bait. The bait came in the form of an old name, Salvatore Giordano, known as Sal G-Man. Once a respected soldier under Bruno, disappeared after the Scarfo days. Word on the street said he moved to Jersey and opened a bar. Neutral, kept his head down. But that was a lie. Sal had been working for Stanfa for months, low-key, quiet, watching. Now, he made contact with Joey through a burner phone and a voicemail message laced with just enough regret and promise. Joey, I've been out of this a long time, but I got guys who still respect me, guys who want to work, guys who hate what Stanfa's done. I'm in if you're ready to make a move. One sit down, no heat, just us. Joey was cautious, paranoid, but also desperate. He couldn't tell who was still loyal. He couldn't recruit. His crew was skeleton thin, and half of them didn't show their faces anymore. So when Sal's message came in, it sounded like a lifeline, a way back into power, back into relevance. He called Sal back the same night. They set the meet. Wednesday night, 9 p.m., warehouse lot off Delaware Avenue. Neutral ground, known for being quiet. Joey picked 2 men to come with him, not his last remaining muscle, his most expendable ones, just in case. On Stanfa's end, the plan was already in motion. Tony Russo scouted the lot 2 nights prior, checked escape routes, tested visibility, checked for cops, cameras, and stray wanderers. It was perfect, too perfect. Which made Tony nervous. What if Joey smells it, he asked John the day before. John, sitting at the same desk he'd sat at for decades, didn't even look up. He won't, Tony raised an eyebrow. How do you know? John finally looked up, calm, cold. Because he thinks he's still in the game. Wednesday night came. The city felt heavy. Clouds hung low, like they were waiting for a funeral. The warehouse lot sat half abandoned, a mix of broken fencing, rusted barrels, and cracked pavement full of weeds and oil. At 8:52 p.m., a black sedan rolled up. Joey stepped out, dressed in all black, hoodie pulled over his head. He looked thinner, older, like a dog that'd been left out in the rain for too long. His 2 men stepped out behind him, each scanning the shadows like they were walking into hell with blindfolds on. A single bulb hung over the side door of the warehouse, flickering. Sal was already inside, waiting. And hidden behind crates in the dark corners of the lot were 4 of Stanfa's best, each armed, each silent, each ready to do what they were brought into this world to do. Joey walked into the warehouse, cautious but calm. Sal sat on an old folding chair, arms resting on his knees like he was talking to an old friend. Joey, he said. Joey nodded. You come alone? Joey asked. Sal nodded. Of course. Joey took a few more steps, stopped. Something felt off, too quiet, even for this part of town. His men followed behind, uneasy. Then Sal said something that froze the air in the room. He wanted me to say hi. Joey's eyes narrowed. Who? Sal looked him dead in the eyes. Your father. That was the moment it clicked. Too late. Before Joey could draw his gun, the lights cut out. 3 muffled gunshots rang out. 2 of Joey's men collapsed. No screams, just thuds. Joey dove behind a barrel, fired 2 wild shots into the dark. Someone returned fire, just 1 shot. It clipped Joey in the arm, spinning him into a pile of scrap. He crawled, gasping, blood pouring from his elbow, gun empty, vision blurry. And then, the lights flicked back on. Only 1 figure stood in front of him now, John Stanfa. The old man walked slow, no gun, no guards, just him. Joey looked up, panting, bleeding, shaking. You don't have the balls, he spat, trying to sound tough. John stared, then pulled a pistol from his coat and dropped it on the floor between them. I'm not here to shoot you, he said. Joey blinked. What? John's voice was calm, controlled, final. You said this was your city. You told people I was a ghost, that I was finished, that I was too old. So now, I'm giving you one last chance to prove it. Joey stared at the gun. What is this? Some cowboy sah? John shrugged. You wanted the throne, didn't you? Take it. Joey's hand twitched. John didn't flinch. Joey reached for the gun and realized the clip was missing. He looked up. John stepped forward, raised his hand, and slapped Joey across the face, hard, not to hurt him, to humiliate him. You don't get to die like a man, he said. You get to crawl. Joey stared, stunned. His face flushed. His hand moved to swing, but two more of Stanfa's men stepped out from the shadows, guns drawn. Joey froze. John turned and walked away, leaving Joey on the ground, broken, breathless, and bleeding. But not dead. Not yet. Back in the bakery, Tony poured a drink. "You sure about letting him live?" John didn't answer at first, then finally, "He's more useful alive." Tony raised an eyebrow. "How?" John took the glass. "Trophies don't talk back." That night, Joey disappeared. Not killed, just gone. Some said he left Philly. Others said Stanfa kept him locked up somewhere. Nobody knew, but the streets, they knew one thing for sure. The war was over. And John Stanfa, he was still standing. The warehouse lights faded. The smoke cleared. Joey Merlino was gone. And with that, the street war ended. But in a tall, cold building just 2 blocks from the Liberty Bell, Paul Harris sat in a folding chair, a styrofoam coffee cup in his hand, staring at a corkboard covered in red string and black and white mugshots. He didn't feel victory. He didn't feel loss. He felt frustration, because for the last 2 years, he'd watched Philadelphia erupt. He watched John Stanfa rise like a relic dragged from the grave and somehow beat the future with the past. And now, the blood was dry, the streets were quiet, but the name Stanfa still sat on top of his list, and Paul wasn't the kind of man who left jobs unfinished. "Sir, you need to see this," his tech guy said one morning. It was a video, grainy footage, security cam, deep South Philly. It showed Joey Merlino, the last time he was seen. He was bruised, bleeding, limping out of a warehouse. Seconds later, the camera glitched. Harris watched it twice, 3 times. "This is it," he said. They had a window. Joey had survived something, barely, and he vanished after that. Paul knew what it meant. He pulled the string tighter on the board, pinned Joey's face right next to Stanfa's. "This wasn't just a turf war," he said aloud. "This was a purge." Meanwhile, across the city, John Stanfa was back to his routine. 7:30 a.m. coffee in the bakery, 3 newspapers, folded perfect, a single chair by the front window, no guards, no noise, just peace. But peace is the most dangerous moment in a gangster's life, because in war, you're alert. In peace, you're exposed. And for the first time in years, John let his guard relax. Only slightly, but slightly is enough. That week, the indictments started rolling in, not on Stanfa, not directly, on his men, 3 of them, low-tier guys, bookies, messengers, union grunts, picked up on old charges, refiled in new wrappers. The feds weren't going after bullets anymore. They were going after paper, tax fraud, money laundering, wire transfers that didn't match. They were peeling the edges of the empire, piece by piece, waiting to see if something inside would snap. Tony brought him the news one evening. They grabbed Enzo. "He's not talking yet, but they're holding him without bail." John nodded. "He won't flip." Tony hesitated. "They're not playing the old game anymore, John. They're using tools we don't understand. They're using time, data, leverage." John looked up, eyes calm. "We've buried more rats than the city's sanitation department. They want to use paper? Fine. Just means we stop writing things down." Tony grinned slightly, but inside, he felt it too. This wasn't the streets. This was the system, and the system had all the time in the world. Then came the leak. Somebody, they never confirmed who, handed off a folder to the feds, not just names. Ledgers, real books, years of transactions coded but legible, drop spots, delivery routes, shell companies, and one name stood out on page 9, John R. Stanfa, not fake, not initials, his full name, written in careful penmanship beside a cash transfer to a drywall company that hadn't existed since 1987. Paul Harris held the folder like it was the Holy Grail. They'd never gotten this close. Not with Scarfo, not with Bruno, not with any of them. Stanfa had always been the ghost, the one who knew how to vanish inside silence. But this was his fingerprint, and Paul could feel it. "I need a warrant," he said. "Probable cause?" his supervisor asked. Paul held up the folder. "This is probable destiny." The warrant came 3 days later. Federal search of Stanfa's legitimate businesses, construction offices, the bakery, even his old Cadillac. They moved quick, mid-morning. John was halfway through his second espresso when the front door opened and 6 federal agents stepped inside. Tony stood instantly. John didn't. He sipped his coffee, wiped his mouth. "You're late," he said. Paul Harris stepped in behind them. "No, John, I'm right on time." They didn't arrest him, not yet. They searched, they questioned. They pulled files, hard drives, receipts, invoices, everything. But John, he sat there the whole time, didn't blink, didn't sweat, didn't ask for a lawyer. When Paul tried to press, tried to lean in close with that voice agents think makes people confess, John just smiled. "I've seen popes fall and presidents lie," he said. "You think I'm going to break because you've got a file cabinet and a badge?" Paul smiled back. "No, but someone around you might." He was right. The feds started turning screws. Eddie Russo, the brother Tony lost who had reemerged weeks after Joey disappeared, had gone to the FBI quietly. He had questions, wanted protection, wanted to know if the war was over. They gave him safety, then they gave him a pen. He didn't sign, not yet. But Paul had him, and others followed. Not soldiers, family, wives, cousins, bookkeepers. The fringe of the empire started pulling away from the center. Tony heard about Eddie from a contact in Camden. He punched a hole in the wall of John's office that night. "He's scared," Tony said. "They got to him." John nodded. "I know." Tony stared. "Let me fix it." John lit a cigarette. "No." "Why not?" John exhaled slowly. "Because I'm tired of hiding bodies. Let the feds play their hand." But that wasn't the real reason. The truth was, John could feel it, the noose tightening, not just around his crew, around him. He had lasted longer than any of them, survived Scarfo, outlived Bruno, buried Joey. But the system didn't bleed, and now it had him in its teeth. Paul watched from the edge. He wasn't rushing. He didn't need to. Stanfa's crew was splintering without a single shot fired, a slow death, the kind that didn't make the papers, the kind that stuck. But Paul made one mistake. He thought John was beaten. He thought old men die with dignity. But John Stanfa wasn't a man made for dignity. He was made for war. John Stanfa always knew it would end like this, not in a blaze of gunfire, not on a throne surrounded by loyal men, but in silence, in isolation, with the walls closing in and the law moving inch by inch through the cracks he once called shadows. That was the thing about empires. They don't die in war, they die in paperwork. It was Tony who brought the list. Late night, storm outside, thunder crawling across the city like something alive. He slid the folder onto the kitchen table, same one John had eaten at for 20 years. Same table where meetings had been held, deals struck, friends buried in conversation before they were buried in the ground. Now it held names, flippers, rats, weak blood, 12 total. 4 are already talking, Tony said. John didn't look surprised. He flipped open the folder, stared at each photo like a priest studying his final congregation. Enzo Morelli, Frankie Tagliano, Mario Caputo, and Eddie Russo, Tony's little brother. John closed the folder, said nothing. Tony stood there, fists clenched. "Say the word," he muttered. "We clean it up." John shook his head. "No." Tony blinked. "No. They're not the problem," John said quietly. "The problem's bigger than them now." John had seen it before, in Sicily, in Brooklyn, in Philly during the Bruno days, the moment when the life stopped being about power and started being about preservation. That's when the rats show up. Not because they want to, but because they are afraid. Afraid of prison, of losing what little they have left, of being forgotten. That fear doesn't go away. It spreads. It infects. And now, John's empire was infected. The next morning, the bakery didn't open. Shutters down, chairs still stacked. For the first time in decades, the neighborhood didn't smell like fresh bread by 8 a.m. John sat inside alone. No papers, no coffee. Just silence. Tony showed up around 10. You all right? John nodded. Just thinking. Tony sat across from him. What now? John took a long breath, then said something Tony hadn't heard in years. Call everyone in, Tony frowned. Everyone? Anyone still loyal. They met that night, back at the warehouse on Delaware Avenue. No lights, no cars parked out front, just quiet footsteps, old jackets, tight faces, 8 men total, all survivors, some young, most old, all marked. Tony stood at John's side. He didn't speak, just watched. John stepped forward, looked each man in the eye. Feds are coming, he said. That's not news. But what is news? They're coming with names, names from inside, our own blood. Nobody moved, nobody flinched. John continued. You've all got a choice. Stay in, ride the storm, or walk away. No heat if you leave now, but if you stay, he let that hang. The silence was heavy, like confession before judgment. One man stepped back. Respectfully, John, I'm out. John nodded, said nothing. The man walked out, didn't look back. 7 remained. John smiled, just a little. They made a plan, not to survive. That part was over, but to make sure the last chapter was written in blood, not courtrooms. Because if the end was coming, John was going to write it himself. Paul Harris got the call the next morning. One of the flippers, Frankie Tagliano, was dead, found in a motel off I-95, taped to a chair, no blood, no bruises, just a single shot through the heart and a note pinned to his chest. Better than wearing a wire. Paul stood over the body for 10 minutes, didn't say a word. He didn't have to. He knew what it meant. Stanfa had chosen war. By the end of the week, 2 more were gone. Mario Caputo, drowned in his bathtub. Enzo Morelli, hung in his garage, hands tied behind his back. Suicide? The official reports would say yes, but Paul knew better. Each time he found a message scrawled somewhere nearby, on a mirror, on a wall, on the back of a napkin. We die our way. Old school, brutal, precise, loud in its own silent language. The city buzzed with rumors. Stanfa's cleaning house. Feds can't touch him. Joey's gone and John's burying the rest. But it wasn't just about sending messages anymore. It was about legacy. The one thing John had left. He'd lost his wife, buried his son, outlived friends, enemies, ghosts. And now they wanted to erase his name with a file folder and a fingerprint? No, that wouldn't stand. Then came the RICO papers. Hand-delivered to John's lawyer on a Thursday. Full indictment, racketeering, murder, money laundering, tax fraud, conspiracy. Everything but breathing. 68 pages of slow death. He read every word, didn't blink. Just turned the last page, closed the folder, and poured himself a drink. Tony was pacing. They're gonna come for you, John nodded. They already have? Tony stopped. I'll go with you. John smiled. No, you've done enough. Tony leaned on the counter. This ain't your weight to carry alone. John looked up. It's always been mine. But Paul Harris had one more move, one last shot at twisting the knife. He flipped Eddie, not just on paper, on camera, full testimony. Eddie sat in a hotel room in D.C., eyes red, hands shaking. He told them everything, drop locations, old murders, names, dates. But the real blow? He gave them a phone call, a private one, between him and John, recorded on a line Eddie swore had been clean. It wasn't. It was short, 32 seconds. But in those 32 seconds, John said just enough to connect him to 2 bodies. That was it. That was the rope. The arrest came on a Sunday, early morning. No sirens, no grandstand, just a knock at the back door of the bakery. John opened it himself. Paul Harris stood there, suit pressed, eyes calm. John Stanfa, he said, you're under arrest. John nodded. No cuffs. Paul hesitated, then nodded back. John turned, grabbed his coat, and walked out the door. The papers exploded. John Stanfa arrested in massive mob crackdown. Old world Don brought down after decades in shadows. Last of the real gangsters faces federal charges. They printed his photo, the one from 1983, the mugshot. Not the man he was now. Because the man he was now would never smile for a camera. Tony watched it all from a rooftop in South Philly. Binoculars, coffee, silence. He saw them take John in. Didn't cry, didn't flinch. Just stood there, watching, knowing what came next. In prison, John didn't talk, didn't eat much, didn't complain. He got his hour of yard time, didn't use it. He sat by the window in his cell and watched the sky. When they asked him for statements, he said one thing: "You'll remember me." And they did. Because even behind bars, the city whispered his name. In butcher shops, in barber shops, in corner stores, and boxing gyms, kids asked their fathers who was Stanfa, and the father said he was the last man who didn't break. Federal Holding Facility, Philadelphia. Block D, Cell 17. Cement bed, one window, no view. John Stanfa sat on a plastic chair, the same way he sat at dinner tables and warehouse meetings, back straight, hands folded, eyes heavy with thought. Outside, the city had moved on. Or at least, it pretended to. The war was over. The throne was empty. The Don was caged. But even now, no one filled the vacuum. Not really, not convincingly. Because every time someone tried to make a move, open a new racket, claim turf, reorganize, people asked the same quiet question: what would Stanfa do? In South Philly, Tony Russo kept his head down. No headlines, no interviews, no noise. But he moved. Quietly, kept what was left of the circle together, not to rebuild the empire. That wasn't the goal anymore. The goal was to protect the name, Stanfa's name, not out of fear, but out of something deeper: respect. The streets had changed. Cameras were everywhere. Guys flipped after one night in holding. Families got smaller. Rules meant less. But Stanfa had stood tall through all of it. And in the code Tony still lived by, that meant something. So he made his calls, checked in on the old guys, made sure widows had groceries, kept a quiet leash on the union boys still loyal. And every Sunday, he visited John. The visits were short, 30 minutes, strict rules, no touching, no notes, just two old men on opposite sides of a glass wall. Tony talked, John mostly listened. He didn't ask about the streets. He asked about smells, the bakery, the sea, rain on the windows. Because now, that's what memory had become. Senses. Tony always ended the visit the same way. "You need anything?" And John always said the same thing: "I need you to remember who I was." But outside the fence, not everyone was loyal. Younger guys, the kind who wore designer sneakers and posted cryptic quotes online, had started testing old turf. Sons of former earners, nephews of old runners, wannabes. They didn't care about codes, they cared about flash, about control. And one of them, Ricky Merlino, Joey's cousin, was getting loud. He'd been quiet for years after Joey's fall, disappeared, licked wounds, waited. Now, with Stanfa locked up, he saw daylight, started throwing parties, started telling people the Merlino name was back. Tony got word fast. A guy from West Philly, barely 20, claimed Stanfa was a washed-up ghost, said the streets needed young blood. When Tony heard it, he didn't yell, didn't get mad, he just smiled. That tight, cold Stanfa smile. Ann made a call. 2 nights later, the kid was found on the steps of a South Street club, alive, but barely. Broken nose, 2 fingers crushed, a bag over his head with a note inside. "We don't forget the dead, and he ain't dead yet." Word spread fast. The message wasn't about power. It was about memory. The kind of memory you don't disrespect. Because in the neighborhoods where Stanfa once ruled, his shadow still walked, and even locked away, he still moved pieces. He didn't need guns anymore. He had loyalty. Inside, John received a letter. No return address, just 3 words on a folded napkin. He remembers well. He smiled, just barely. And for the first time in weeks, he asked the guard for a pen. He started writing, not confessions, not memoirs, not plans for trial, letters to people who mattered, to those who had built with him, bled for him, died in his name. Each letter was simple, no names, no addresses, but each sentence dripped with clarity. You were never a soldier. You were a pillar. They don't understand the weight of silence the way we did. Let them play king while the real kingdom sleeps. The rain always washes the pain away. I didn't build this for money. I built it because the world needed order, even if the world didn't want it. He handed off the letters to a guard, a young one, quiet, eyes sharp. He didn't say much, just, "Make sure these go to the right streets." The guard nodded. He knew what to do. Some debts don't need to be explained. A week later, the bakery reopened. Different name, same owner. Tony didn't sell. He just changed the sign, fixed the windows, repainted the door. But inside, everything stayed the same. Same smell, same layout. Same pictures on the wall. John in his younger days, shaking hands with city councilmen, union reps, old dons long dead. People came in quietly. Some bought bread, some didn't. Some just stood near the back wall, took a deep breath, then walked out. Because for them, it wasn't a bakery, it was a monument. But the feds weren't done. Paul Harris had filed for the trial date. They had the tapes, they had the ledgers, they had the names. On paper, they had the case locked. But Paul wasn't celebrating. Because every time he looked at John in court, Stanfa didn't blink, didn't sweat, didn't even acknowledge the mountain of evidence stacked against him. He sat like a man at peace. Because he knew what Paul didn't. Cases win convictions, legends win history. The courtroom buzzed, testimonies began. The flippers came in, nervous, clean-cut, coached, one by one. They told their stories, pointed fingers, described drop-offs, murder plots, money trails. John listened, didn't flinch. Then it was Eddie Russo's turn. He walked in slow, looked older than his age, broken. He avoided eye contact with Tony in the back row. He cleared his throat. And then he cracked. Mid-sentence, started shaking. The judge called for order. Paul rushed forward, tried to calm him, but it was too late. Eddie sobbed into his hands and refused to speak another word. "I can't," he said. "I can't do this." The courtroom was stunned. Paul was furious, but John, he smiled, because fear fades, but loyalty lingers. The federal courtroom was too cold. They always were. The walls were pale gray, the kind of sterile that felt like it didn't just belong to the system, it was the system. The lights buzzed overhead. The jury box stood full of stiff bodies, all of them trying to look neutral while sitting in front of a man they had heard about since they were kids. John R. Stanfa, on trial, not in the streets, not in the papers, in real life. Finally, they thought they'd see a monster, but he sat there like a man waiting for a train. Wrinkled suit, sharp eyes, no emotion, no defense team that barked, no long speeches, just one old man and a silence that spoke louder than anything the prosecution had. Paul Harris stood tall in his final argument. This was his moment. 12 years chasing ghosts, 12 years watching bodies fall and doors stay shut. He paced slowly in front of the jury. He ruled with fear, Harris said, voice steady. He buried men in silence. He controlled unions, neighborhoods, construction sites, even funerals. And he did it all from behind a curtain of respectability. He pointed to John. This man is not just a criminal. He's a structure, a disease that infected the spine of this city. He's not some washed-up old man. He is the blueprint for organized crime in Philadelphia. If we don't put an end to this now, we never will. John didn't respond. He didn't look up. He just ran his thumb along the edge of his chair like he was rubbing dust off marble. The judge gave him the floor. "Mr. Stanfa, do you wish to make a final statement?" He stood, took his time, cleared his throat once, and then, calmly, "I am not guilty." The courtroom buzzed. The judge raised his gavel, but John wasn't done. "Not guilty of being disloyal. Not guilty of turning my back on those who trusted me. Not guilty of breaking a code that I lived by longer than some of you have been breathing." He looked at the jury. "This trial is not about crime. It's about control. You don't like that I made men listen, that I built something you couldn't break without dragging me into a room and pointing fingers at ghosts." He looked at Harris. "You don't like that I didn't fold." Then he sat back down. The judge gave no reaction, just nodded. Jury will begin deliberations. They were out for 9 hours, and when they returned, the foreman stood with sweaty palms and a trembling voice. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty on all charges. The courtroom exhaled. Paul Harris didn't smile. He just lowered his head and whispered, "Finally." Sentencing came 2 weeks later. Life without parole. Federal custody, maximum security, no bail. No chance of early release. At 75 years old, it might as well have been a death sentence, but when the judge handed it down, John's face didn't change. Not once. He nodded as if confirming a delivery. When he stood to be taken away, he said one thing to the judge. "You locked the man, not the name." The streets reacted. South Philly went quiet for a week. Old-timers met in barbershops. Retired guys in tracksuits stood on corners in silence. Bakers, union boys, second-generation hustlers, all whispered the same words. He didn't fold. Not once. Not when Joey went rogue. Not when his own son flipped. Not when the FBI came for him with every file they had. He didn't fold. And in the life, that's not defeat. That's immortality. Paul Harris should have been celebrating. He had made the front page, got handshakes. Letters from D.C., an invitation to speak at Quantico. But he didn't sleep. Not well, because he knew the truth. He didn't kill the man. He just caged the ghost. And ghosts, they stay with you. Inside prison, John was moved to his final facility. Isolated, federal supermax. He didn't talk much, didn't write. But every 2 weeks he received letters from people with no names. One read, "I started a crew in Jersey. We use your rules, your discipline. No flash, just the work." Another, "My brother got out. He said you saved his life back in '89. Gave him a job when no one else would. I never forgot that." Another came with no words, just a newspaper clipping from 1971. A young John Stanfa shaking hands with Angelo Bruno. There were dozens more, each a candle, each a reminder that legends don't vanish, they just change form. Meanwhile, back in Philly, something else was rising. A new generation. Young guys with smart mouths and empty hearts. TikTok gangsters, cryptocurrency scams, no code, no structure. They took photos with cash, posted cryptic threats online, tried to imitate what they didn't understand. And slowly, the city started aching, robberies went up, hits got sloppier, deals broke down. No one could sit at a table without pulling a piece first. It wasn't a family anymore. It was a fracture. Tony Russo saw it coming. He stayed out of it, watched from a distance. He ran the bakery, visited John's grave, the metaphorical one, every Sunday in prison, kept the old ways alive like a priest with no congregation. But eventually, the streets called. A young crew from South Jersey spray-painted Stanfa's dead on the side of the bakery. Tony didn't call the cops. He made 2 calls, and by sunrise, 4 bodies were in the river. That same week, a newspaper headline read, "The last war is still being fought." They interviewed Paul Harris, asked him if the conviction meant anything now. He said, "We put him away, but his rules still haunt the city. He's gone, but no one's replaced him. That says more than I ever could." John Stanfa died on a Monday. No headlines, no sirens, no final trial, no riot in the streets, no shootout in the prison yard. He died quietly, alone in his cell, at 4:12 a.m. Heart failure, 79 years old. The guards didn't notice right away. He'd been still for hours. When they finally opened the door, he looked like he was asleep, his glasses still on, a book half open on his lap, one hand resting across his chest like he was remembering something. There was no struggle. No sign of fear, just stillness. The news broke late. A single-line press release from the Bureau of Prisons. Inmate John R. Stanfa, age 79, pronounced deceased early Monday morning. No foul play suspected. It barely made page 5 of the Inquirer. After all, by then the world had moved on. There were new wars, new names, new scandals. The streets had gone digital. Power came in Wi-Fi passwords and Bitcoin wallets. The old men were gone, the old ways buried. Or so they thought. Tony Russo was in the bakery when he got the call. He didn't answer it right away. He knew what it was. He'd felt it before the phone even rang. He stared out the window for a long time, watching the sunrise paint the buildings gold. The street was empty. A cat walked across the sidewalk. The smell of dough hung in the air. He finally picked up. Didn't say anything. The voice on the other end didn't either. Just breathed for a few seconds. And then whispered, "He's gone." Tony hung up, walked to the back, pulled down the old bottle of scotch John had given him 20 years ago. He poured 2 glasses, set one across from himself, and drank in silence. The funeral was small. The bureau wouldn't allow a full procession. No press, no suits, just Tony, 2 old men from the Union days, and a priest who didn't ask questions. John was buried in a cemetery outside the city, one of those places where names mean more than the stones they're carved into. His headstone was simple. John R. Stanfa, father, immigrant, builder. No mention of the life, no dates beyond birth and death, no title, because Stanfa never needed one carved in stone. He had it carved in memory. A week later, graffiti appeared on a brick wall in South Philly. "Real bosses don't die, they wait." Nobody claimed it, nobody covered it up, because everyone knew what it meant. In the weeks that followed, something strange happened. The violence dipped, the noise quieted. The young crews slowed their roll. It wasn't fear, it was respect. Or maybe guilt, or maybe something deeper, something tribal, like the streets themselves were pausing to exhale. As if the city, after all these years, had finally acknowledged that the last pillar was gone. And without that pillar, there was nothing left to lean on. Paul Harris sat at his desk the morning after he heard the news. No press calls, no champagne. He just looked at the file, the Stanfa file, 12 years thick. Every arrest, every lead, every photograph, every ghost. He opened the top drawer of his desk, took the file out, paused, and then placed it into the shred bin. Not out of defeat, out of closure. There was nothing left to chase. The man was gone. The case was over. But the story, that would outlive them all. Back in the neighborhood, the bakery stayed open. Tony didn't sell. He changed the name again, not to hide, to evolve. It became Pillar Bread. Locals understood. They nodded when they walked by, tapped their fingers against the glass, brought their sons inside and said things like, "This place used to be something." Not in sadness, in reverence. Years passed. The city kept changing. Skyscrapers rose. Corner stores became vape shops. Barbers started taking Venmo. But if you asked anyone in South Philly, anyone who'd lived there long enough, they'd tell you the same thing. Stanfa didn't lose, because he didn't. He survived longer than most, outlived enemies, walked through wars, sat silent while the government bled half its cases dry. He didn't snitch, didn't cry, didn't run. He just endured, and that's not defeat, that's legacy. One afternoon, a young man came into the bakery, barely 20, dressed like the new era, flashy watch, designer hoodie, gold chain. He asked Tony for a loaf, then paused. "You knew him, right?" Tony didn't look up. "Knew who?" The kid smirked. "Come on, don't play me. Stanfa, the Don." Tony bagged the bread, looked the kid dead in the eye. "Kid," he said, voice gravel thick, "if you have to ask, you don't deserve the answer." The kid left, but he didn't forget. Because that's what Stanfa left behind. Not an empire, not territory, not money, but a myth. The kind that survives arrests, trials, bullets, time. The kind of myth whispered in kitchens and alleys and prison cells. The kind that reminds every man who thinks he's the next king. You're not the first, and if you ain't careful, you'll be nothing. John Stanfa didn't write his story. He didn't beg for redemption, didn't ask for understanding. He just lived it. One rule, one code, one city. And when he was finally gone, the streets didn't cheer. They just got quiet. Because the truth was, they knew something the world refused to say out loud. John Stanfa was the last boss who meant it. And now that he was gone, the throne wasn't empty. It was buried with him.